Hello, 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 and welcome to the fourth episode of Cannesversations. I'm Eliana,
And I'm Patrick.
and today we're joined by Giancarlo.
Hello, I'm Giancarlo M. Sandoval. I am a writer for Film Leuven, a German publication, and also for my own website, No One. And I'm here, happy to be here, actually.
We're happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. Today we'll be talking about three films: The Zone of Interest by Jonathan Glazer, Close Your Eyes by Victor Erice, and Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell by Thien.
Right. All from different sections of this year's festival.
Yeah, and one is from competition, the other one from Cannes.
And the Victor Erice film is from Premiere.
Yeah, Cannes.
Which had quite a, there was quite a controversy here around that because Victor Erice, he was eager to be in competition, and it's sort of understandable because he is considered to be one of the great directors in Spanish cinema history. And there was an open letter in the El País newspaper where he spoke to that, and also was kind of regretful that no one of the festival, and I suppose especially Thierry Frémaux, no one really contacted him more closely about that decision.
Yeah, I read that letter, and it's a bit, it's interesting, the tone that he's trying to strike. It's a bit like, I should have gotten in there, and at the same time, I'm trying not to burn too many bridges because I actually want to keep a working relationship with the festival. But yeah, I mean, essentially, I don't know. It's very weird to me because asking a bit of time or like clarity from Thierry Frémaux and the people at Cannes is a bit odd for him. I mean, he says that it's a standard procedure to let him know if like the film will be in whatever section it is, but I'm not so sure about that. And I mean, it's an odd position. It's still kind of shit that it happened, but yeah, I mean, controversial film, and Zone of Interest is another controversial film, and Inside the Yellow Cocoon Nest is not a controversial film.
Yeah.
I was wondering if before we start, if you wanted to talk a little bit about your experience thus far during the festival.
Sure, I can do that. I've been here since the 15th, like you as well, I think, and it's gone gradually downhill, mainly because of how tired I seem to be, and maybe older bodies malfunctioning like half the time.
Oh, and Giancarlo, maybe we should say that this is your first Cannes, right?
Oh yeah, this is the first edition, the first time that I've been here as a film critic, writer, whatever. And yeah, it's been. I mean, I'm trying to like do a couple of festivals during the year to see like which ones are the ones that are most like actually giving me films that I like, because I don't want to go to a festival and watch like 50 films and be like, I didn't like half of them. So it's been nice to come here and to like understand what it's all about, what and I don't know, critics are always complaining about on Twitter, and yeah, watch the films, watch the screenings, go out, have a quick impression, have a quick talk with friends and stuff. And yeah, I mean, right now I'm mostly tired. I'm looking forward to going back to Berlin. But yeah, I've watched some pretty good films, some very mediocre ones, but in general, good experience to be here. Yeah.
Right, yes, I have to echo that. It is quite tired. I think at this point in the festival, we're all just running on espresso.
Yeah, I don't drink coffee, but I agree with the sentiment. I run on enthusiasm, like you said.
Yes.
Even more impressive then. Okay, maybe let's go to our first film that we talk about today, or is there something that we still wanted to cover, Eliana?
No, I think we can get right in with the first film, The Zone of Interest by Jonathan Glazer.
So, Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest, his first film in 10 years. The last film was
Under the Skin.
Under the Skin, exactly. In the meantime, he did direct some shorts. There was, for instance, The Fall that I think is a few years old. That was, from a technical standpoint, very impressive, I guess. This is the new A24 film, and they really tried everything to keep this one as much as they could in secret. So there wasn't anything shared except for one photo ahead of the festival. And this one looked like a, happy family or friends gathering, in the field, like a sweet picnic or something, which, as you might expect, is far from what this film is about. What is this film about, Giancarlo?
This film is an adaptation of a Amos novel of the same name. So the film is about a family that lives next to Auschwitz, basically. And the father is, I think he's in charge of the camp. And essentially it's a not portrait, but a kind of following of this bourgeois family throughout their days. It's a very matter-of-factly sort of recollection of that time. Very cold, very distanced. Yeah, I would say that's the main thrust of the film.
Right, yes, it's based off of the real life family of Rudolf Huss. And I believe Glazer said that he found accounts, or perhaps it was rather the novelist, who had heard accounts of Jewish maids who had lived in the Huss family's home, who then witnessed a type of a fight where the wife, Hedwig Huss, was very angry at Rudolf because he was to be transferred for a while when he was managing the efficacy of the extermination camp. And so this film focuses a lot on, it's very hard to talk about this film without using the Hannah Arendt phrase, the banality of evil. And a lot of what goes on seems in an almost absurdist way. We see, as Giancarlo just said, the family lives right next to the Auschwitz camp. Hedwig Huss is essentially creating her own gated community, her own paradise. She shows her family, she shows her friends this delectably lovely garden that she's been working on, and she's become a sort of queen of her domestic sphere that happens to be right next to Auschwitz. And this film was very disturbing, but very in a way that's so distant that you can't help but think that this is also very immediate in our current political atmosphere.
Absolutely.
How was your viewing of the film?
Yeah, I must say I was, I had high expectations for this film, and I guess, you cannot say that Jonathan Glazer does not deliver on, presenting us something we may not have seen in that form, when it comes to the representation of Auschwitz. I must say I found it really theoretically, charged and theoretically informed. And in that sense, I felt like the film seeks for distance to its characters. I found myself distant to the film as well. And because I always saw through the sort of theoretical framework that is used in that film, so of course you mentioned Hannah Arendt, but we have of course this like Jewish rule that you may not draw an image of, it is about the unrepresentability of the horrors of Auschwitz. So, and in that sense, I think Jonathan Glazer somehow went a safe path here, in the sense that if I thought of how to make a film about Auschwitz, I would probably, consult theory maybe. I would think of how you can create this sort of distance to it and don't try to evoke some sort of realism or something, as other films have tried, that either in the like Hollywood way with Spielberg or with this Son of Saul film, for instance, that try to go for exactly the opposite. And in that sense, even though people say that this is something new and so on, I agree this is new, but it didn't so much come as a surprise to me because I can see the theoretical outline here. I don't know how you felt about that, Giancarlo.
Well, I had many thoughts while watching it, but I think what you mentioned about it being theoretical and conceptually charged is very, very true. Because while watching it, I mean, it's also my own baggage that when I watch films and when I watch this stuff, I'm usually thinking, okay, that has to do with this book or with this, I don't know, poem or whatever I read or something. But in this one, I kept thinking, the first thought, I mean, I think it's kind of like the obvious one, is this memory of watching a Hollywood Reporter roundtable with Mikhail Haneke,
Right.
where he's asked, so what subject wouldn't you tackle in your films? And he was just like, I wouldn't tackle the Holocaust, or I wouldn't tackle like this time because it's horrible. I think Schindler's List is horrendous. I think that shouldn't have been done, blah, 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 etc., etc. And while watching it, you think, this is the kind of thing that Mikhail Haneke would be like, I approve. This
Exactly,
is
yeah.
exactly like very conceptual, very distanced in a way, but the way that he gets to this distance is very interesting because it's not also, I mean, to speak a bit about theory, it reminds me of this quote from Adorno. He was like, poetry is impossible after Auschwitz. And if we equate the poetry, the most popular poetry of our time, like films, popular films, then there's no way to do a popular film about Auschwitz. So what I kept thinking about was, okay, what is this person trying to say with this framing? Because the way that he does it is, there are two technical things that I should mention. When you grab your iPhone and you want to shoot a video, you just bought an iPhone and you want to shoot a video, you get this motion smoothing sort of thing, like 8K, 4K motion smoothing thing. And that's exactly the feeling that I got watching the film. I don't know, I didn't stay to read the equipment because I had like a screening afterwards, but I don't know what he used, but it looks a hell of a lot like iPhone footage, which is it's not to knock on him, but it's a technique. It's a very interesting one because it gives the images a kind of abhorrent sort of like contemporary look. You're not looking at a 16 millimeter or like an old film. It looks like something that would happen now. And the way that to me, it recalls a bit like, given the subject of the film and the banality of evil and shooting with this 4K, 8K thing, I was just like, what are you saying about our contemporary society that you are choosing to use this format? Are you saying something about iPhones or about videos in general, the way that we are tracking people? And also this way of shooting as if it was like a security camera footage.
Exactly.
Security camera footage and filming like sometimes a whole body. And I mean, one person goes into a room, then goes into another, camera switches, security camera footage. And I kept thinking of just, I mean, it's cold, but it's also cruel in its own way. It reminded me of this title from Gilles Deleuze, Coldness and Cruelty. How do you achieve this coldness and this cruelty? Basically by not caring. I mean, the book from the Gilles Deleuze book is about masochism. And it's said there that masoch is not about inflicting pain, but being almost indifferent and cold towards pain. And, well, what do we see here? We see a bourgeois family who is doing all their chores throughout the day, not caring about what's actually happening, like right next door. Those, I mean, just to set up like a bit of the technicalities, but I felt similarly like a bit, okay, like this is interesting, this is good, this is a bit of a theoretical exercise, but I didn't feel the terror, I must say, like you, Eliana. You did feel that sort of...
I felt great unease. There was one sequence of just flowers, and we hear the screams of people who are possibly actively being beaten or burned. And it's just a sequence of gorgeous flowers. I thought the cinematography, which is actually done by the Polish Łukasz Żal, who's known for his work on Ida with...
I think it's Ida, right?
Ida, excuse me.
Palinowski, yeah.
Yes, there was this surveillance, but it was also enticing in a very distant, cold way that you're, in a cruel and cold way that you're talking about. I thought a lot of the details as well really disturbed me, such as when Rudolph goes to the bathroom and he blows his nose in the sink and black soot comes out of his nose. We have a few motifs that reoccur, and the idea of washing his body and washing perhaps any numerous amount of things, such as from guilt to sin, come up too. And there's also a sequence where we see that he repetitively locks the doors each night. He's living in this paradise, but he has to maintain control of it. It's not a paradise, really. It's very difficult, but it's something that has come to be his home. But it's very clear that he's insecure about his position, for me at least. And this contributed to my unease while watching it.
Patrick, what did you think about the framing yourself?
So yeah, the framing, maybe we should say that there are these instances where we basically hear ambient sound very loudly and really hits the bone, it goes deep down. And that sometimes occurs when there was just a scene that is sort of elongated through this ambient sound. And when we hear the sound, we just have monochrome images. We just have a color that appears on screen, and the film already starts with black, and we have the sound. And I think the sort of, if there is anything that could prepare us, this is sort of, that serves the sort of function that we are already, thrown into this atmosphere, I suppose. And that I found very interesting, because it's sort of, while not showing anything, it strengthened it strengthened the experience, it strengthened the horror, which is so weird because we're talking about an audiovisual medium, but while really abstaining from the visual, it actually amplified the effect I felt. And there is another formal idea that is at play here, that is sort of the film negative that we see, which is a side plot line. If you can talk of it as a plot line, but I don't think we need to get into that. Maybe we should later, but I don't know if that's too big of a spoiler. I don't know, but it adds something to the complexity as well. And I'm not sure if I've really gotten behind that yet, I must say. But what I also wanted to ask you is if you felt like, this film, I think it would have been sort of easy to create comedy in these scenes as well. But I felt like the banality never went to the place where we would laugh about the mundane experience, which are so starkly contrasted to what's going on right on the edifice of the neighboring Auschwitz grounds. And I wonder if that would have contributed to the horror one may have felt.
Oh, the comedy, I think so, but I think part of this approach, which is, I remember you also commenting on this, is a very art house approach to the subject. I think it would have added a note of cynicism to the proceedings, which spoils a bit the mood. In case in point, I think the only problem that I may have with the film, beyond its theoretical underpinnings, is the fact that Sandra Hüller is acting there, because I have gotten used to Sandra Hüller basically being a very theatrical actress, and at points it does feel like the film that does go into very explicit sentences and very explicit things, like when she says, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but basically she says, "I am the Queen of Auschwitz." And at points she's seen screaming and taking the tone of the film up a notch. And for me, I mean that hangs together with your question a bit, because the mood is so well framed and so constructed theoretically as well as practically, not only in terms of visuals, but also in terms of the sound, with Mika Levy doing a lot of that sound design. I think those moments take me out of the film. And I think, I would like to believe that Jonathan Glazer is indeed smart enough to let me see this bureaucratic coldness, and for me, letting me understand that that's what the film's all about. But at those points when Sandra Hüller is there, and if comedy would have been inserted, I think I would have felt it even stronger. I feel a bit like he's telling me, do you get it? Like, do you get this irony? Do you get this sort of like display? And that is a very conceited attitude a bit. Like, I understand it, but it's also important to make a very definitive differentiation, I think, between Haneke and like what Glazer is doing.
Right.
Because Haneke would have done a bit of moralizing there, and would have probably added a couple of scenes, strong, like difficult scenes. Glazer has a couple of those things, especially with this subplot, which is subplot, in inverted commas. But yeah, I think in general, I'm just it's a bit expected, as you mentioned before. But there are like different things, like signs that he uses, like symbols and
Right.
signifiers he uses.
Like I don't even feel I don't even know how I feel about this scene when we have Rudolf Höss in his garden smoking a cigar, as he often does, and in the background you have the chimney, the firing chimneys and that really much reminded me of Maus by Art Spiegelman, because he uses similar visuals, and I wonder if that was if that was a nod to Art Spiegelman as well, because he used the same visuals. I don't know if you noted that as well.
I also noticed a little nod maybe to Art Spiegelman. He wears a tank top at some point that has SS on it, and these look exactly like the SS chimney marks in Maus. But off of your point, Giancarlo, in terms of, and yours too, Patrick, in terms of humor, I feel very much that Glazer is able to maintain that tension, because there are some elements where I think if this were a natural family, maybe we would laugh at the fact that, look, I used to work for this family, and now this family, they're our maid now. Or even when they're choosing amongst dresses that were previously owned by, very obviously, by Jewish women, as if they're just having a nice little party, some nice secondhand clothes. And Glazer, in how you're saying, he knows he's able to maintain that tension, so it's not outright comical. It's very cynical.
Exactly. But drawing up that point, I'm like, Sandra Hüller, again, in those scenes, especially where she chooses to humiliate the maids and the people and tell them something to the effect of, are you trying to humiliate me? Like trying to victimize them and play a very awful game, very sadical game. I'm not so sure in those moments, because it becomes too explicit for me, and I would have been perfectly content with a very somber mood piece, because in those moments as well, like the framing gets a bit closer to like the actors and the actresses, and I didn't really need that, and I didn't really need to see like when Rudolf Hess goes to Oranienburg, like that feels also like a bit of a change of setting, change of pace, because we're so trapped in this house next to Auschwitz, and then we go to another place, and it's much more about army stuff, much more correlated to what's happening in Auschwitz. And well, then goes to the ending. But yeah, it's in those moments I feel like I'm not entirely on board with the film, but I can see it as a good theoretical exercise.
Yeah, I think when he's transferred to Oranienburg, that's also maybe, I think that goes somehow against what the film is doing here, because then it becomes more like a marriage drama, and I think that totally distracts from, this proximity to the horror while being in Auschwitz. And I think that didn't quite work for me either, because why would I, I don't think that you can expect the audience to really, sympathize with their marriage arrangements, and this consolation. And I think that was probably not the core of the story, which is why, yeah, I agree. The Oranienburg, the shift to Oranienburg is maybe a bit unnecessary.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe that's also Glazer's intention to try to make it. I don't know. Maybe some people would actually sympathize with this movement, and then recognize that we're not so different. We in our present day, which might be a bit moralizing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's a bit of moralizing, but I think it's much more of a technical moralizing that narrative moralizing. The technical moralizing comes through this usage of this very digital image and this sort of security camera footage. So I think by using those things, it's sort of like he lays these processes bare. And I think with this subplot thing, which I mean with the film negative, it's very interesting how that works, because the film is so much about this sort of theoretical and conceptual interest in Auschwitz that I would say that subplot with the film negatives, in which we see like the lives of Jewish people outside, or a Jewish family outside, I think, is it's almost like it's like very nakedly like a subconscious of what the film is presenting as its conscious sort of narrative thread. Like, this is all that's happening. This is the bureaucracy. This is the coldness. This is the bourgeois family being bourgeois in times of horribleness. And it's very pointed and not necessarily super elegant, but this film negative thing does work as a sort of like, and here are the people that are being treated as subhumans, as not even people. So that's how we see them. But yeah, it sounds like we at least have like really like a lot to talk about Sona's interest. Like,
for sure. And there's even a last scene that we won't go into here, but that also adds to the complexity of the film, and is probably, once you see the film, you probably also want to connect that last scene to the film in its entirety.
With that said, I think it's time that we pivot to a slightly lighter film, even though it is called Close Your Eyes by Victor Erice. Now, only Patrick and I got to see this film.
But it gives me the chance to interview you about the film.
That is true. That is true.
So if I may, let's start with dun, 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 dun. Patrick, what did you think when you left the screening room after watching Close Your Eyes?
Close Your Eyes was probably the film that moved me most at the festival here this year. It's a very slow-paced drama. It's a story about the perhaps impossibility of tracing someone back from the past, and the attempt to reconcile who that person is in your memory, and the representation of that person today. It's a film about this film director whose former main actor and good friend disappeared at some point. And the film starts off with this TV program that looks for cases such as those where people get lost, or where there are mysteries surrounding certain people, and they want to find out more about that, and they reach out to him about his former actor, and he is also in a situation where he needs the money, and he then agrees to having the interview. And
did you happen to see it at the same time?
We didn't see it at the same time. I actually played ticket musical chairs in order to try to see this film after Patrick saw it, because he had a very good impression of it.
And what was your impression after watching it?
This film was very beautiful. As Patrick just said, we have film director Miguel. He is brought forth to star on this show that presents missing people, and his friend Julio, the actor who is a beloved actor in Spain, has been missing. Is just a missing person, and people have suspected that he's either dead, or they believe that he's died by accident. And the TV program brings everything back to relevancy in the film. But the way that the film starts out, the way that it's a meditation on preservation of film, a dedication to analog. It's basically a love letter to film and analog and the past, recognition, previous lives, previous connections. It's very hard, actually, Patrick. I don't know, for me to think about how to best talk about this without revealing too much, because it's almost as if there are some not quite plot twists, but I don't know how.
But I think it's good to talk about form here, and I think you don't reveal too much if you say that the film is sort of book-ended, and we have these two scenes of the film within the film, and in the film within the film, we see this actor that went missing, and we see his former best friend in his profession, acting. And this is contrasted with the time of 2015, when the film is basically set and when our protagonist is contacted by the TV program, because this storyline is presented to us in really digital, digital images as much as you could think of. And this is so much in contrast to, I think, people's preconception of what a Victor Erice film would look like.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, have any of you seen like A Spirit of the Beehive and all the other his other films?
I did see The Spirit of the Beehive, which, that's considered to be such a classic, right? And has, for instance, also inspired Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, because it's also this story about children doing fascism in Spain and during the Second World War. And but I haven't seen El Sur, and I haven't seen his many other projects with other filmmakers. Like he has this interview thing with Kiarostami, I think, and he also was part of several other films with Pedro Costa and Kaurismäki.
Yeah, a couple of omnibus films, I think.
Right.
I was about to ask, Sight Unseen, this sounds like a meta film, like a love dedication to cinema to an extent. And right now, this year and also last year, it's kind of difficult. It's proven kind of difficult for Hollywood directors to sort of do these type of films, especially because, I don't know, a lot of emotions get in there, a lot of like different impressions about cinema. What do you think makes the Victor Erice interesting or different from those films?
Yeah, I think it's just really circumventing these typical traps that other films have fallen into, these pit holes of waving at us constantly that, oh, this is the director here, look at me. I am leaving all these little hints for you to pick up on. And here it rather felt truly embedded in the narrative, and we didn't really see Victor Erice too much. It was really the narrative itself, and I was very grateful for that. And it felt very sincere. It was very much, a matter of longing. It was very much a journey of exploration. Also, maybe so many things that come back from the past, and then they find you in new shapes and new forms, and now you reflect on them. With the time that has gone on, you reflect on them differently. They hit you differently emotionally. And I know that all sounds very vague, but I still want you to explore that yourself. But all these themes are sort of in there. It's a lot about memory. It's a lot about who you started out being and who you are now, and also how relationships have changed and shape over time, and how certain emotions can still be evoked, be it just through a song that just hits this emotional nerve. And I was very moved by that.
Did you have the same impression, Eliana?
Yes, there's a lot of synchronicity in this film that I found was very touching, that I often like when I see films. Sometimes it can feel forced, but for me, sometimes it still has managed to get to a place that moves me. I'd say what's different with this film as opposed to many of these other films that
Yeah.
are trying to push perhaps either an ode to cinema or an autofictional angle on the part of directors that have come out recently, that this film was able to capture this idea of, for me at least, when you have a film, you want someone to see a film because you want to forge their connection with the film in the same way that you see someone else.
Oh.
In the way, I don't know, when you have those films and you go, oh, this person really needs to see this film. This is something in their life that relates to them that they need to see, or this is a film that my friend needs to see because this is how I feel about my relationship with them or with your parents or your or other people in your life. And I think it honed in on this idea of once you are able to present the idea of them seeing this film, will they actually recognize the thing that you recognize?
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty about it. Whereas many of these films we have seen recently, they really insist on the power of cinema and, you know, they make that claim. Here, this film doesn't make the claim. It leaves that question very open to the audience. And I think that's, you know, for the better of the film.
Yeah, that sounds quite beautiful. Because, I mean, through both of your recollections of the film, I remember, I mean, when I was younger and I had friends as opposed to now. No, that's a joke, just a way. I do have friends. But I used to have like film clubs and TV clubs, and I would be like watching something and I would be like, this is something that Eric or like my friend Rodrigo might like. And we kind of pushed each other to like, hey, here, please watch this. I think you're going to like it. With the years, I mean, I think that has been reduced, the amount of times that I've managed to do that or that people do that to me because of taste or because, I don't know, different relationships get forged, like friendships or like you pull away or whatever. It's just different. But it's good to have a reminder, well, according to your opinions and impressions about the film, it's good to have a reminder of that sort of stuff can also happen. I mean, trying to watch a lot of films and write about them, being a critic or whatever, you tend to forget about that sort of power of recommendation. I'm always so scared of recommending things to people because I'm like, are they gonna like it? I don't know. But it is true that it is possible that when you see something, you're like, this is something that Patrick is gonna like. I think so. So please, Patrick, watch it. That's such a lovely gesture. I really lovely to hear you both talk about this film.
Yeah, and maybe one last thing I want to add here, and then we can transition to our last film here. It's just that this really also felt like reading a novel in a sense. You really get a sense of the texture of this person's life. You know, he also like nowadays, in a sense, disillusioned maybe from life, but still, you know, not becoming cynical or something. He's this novelist that has been working on writing a novel for years and never quite succeeded. But he lives in this trailer park and he is really part of his community there. People like him, take care of his dog when he's gone. And it's really such a warm film without being cheesy or without being melodramatic. It never, you know, it never goes for these heights, but it also doesn't go for particular lows. It's really, you know, it's really an in-between film that all the more felt true by abstaining from these heights and lows. Yeah, but I guess we should go to our last film for today because we're running out of time here.
And finally, we'll talk about Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell by Thien. So I actually met Giancarlo in the screening.
Oh, yeah.
So I was wondering if we'll start with you.
Yeah, I actually went to the screening because of Patrick. I canceled my screening of All to Play For because Patrick put on a Discord that we're both together on best film at the festival. And I was like, okay, I gotta see this. So I canceled that and I got my ticket on the balcony and there was you. Yeah. And it was a very, very good experience, actually, watching this film because I have a thing with the Boo films, so first Erstling film or like first film, which because I kind of like them as a sort of experiment, as a first try, sort of like what is this young director gonna do in order to dazzle me, or like to sort of like give me a calling card to see what they are all about. And while watching this, I was like, okay, I can tell this is a first film because there are many things that are being tried here, and there are many things that appeal to me directly about the style. The story is rather vague, but there's a thorough line about a motorcycle accident and an uncle that basically takes care of the son of his sister after this motorcycle accident.
Of his sister-in-law.
Sister-in-law, exactly. And I think it's set. Do you know where it's set? It's in Vietnam, right?
Yeah. So I think he's based in Saigon.
Okay.
And then he goes with his nephew to the countryside.
Yeah. Yeah, and that sounds rather vague, but I think in my experience, a lot of the films that I love have this sort of vague description about them. Like it's very bare bones, and you're just along for the ride. And while watching it, I had a great feeling that I was watching someone that had a similar set of interests as me, perhaps a cinephile to an extent, and that he was just like, I'm gonna put all the things that I like and what I want to do here. Sometimes it doesn't matter like what is coming, but I'm gonna try to put it on, and I'm gonna try to make it as cohesive as possible. And I think that's sort of like the best thing, and not the worst thing, but like sort of the traps of doing a film like this, is that a lot of things work. For example, there are long sequences, really long, elaborate sequences that are not all about like showing you how skillful he is, though that's a part of it because it's a long plane sequence. But it has, I would say, an aesthetic use, an aesthetic value in itself. And it's not at all super showy, low-key showy, perhaps is the term that I would use. But in the end, it has like a lot of thematic richness. And it's lovely, lovely to watch.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about this thematic richness. For me, it was very much an interrogation on life, faith, meaning, the afterlife. How was it for you, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of also embedded in the story outline we have here, right? Because this starts off with the sister-in-law dying off screen, of course. Then we move to the countryside to mourn her over several days. So he visits the family, and of course then there is this lost brother, the husband of his sister-in-law, and this brother has been gone for years, and no one knows where he is. And so there's this longing always in the background of reuniting with this person, perhaps. Also, it's just such a different cultural experience of mourning someone, of paying the last dues to a person, and this communal shared experience. I think that was also made very tangible in the film. But the film was also, whenever we get too close to something like a transcendental experience, whenever we get too close to something that you might think of as being authentic or being reaching this high point, it is interrupted. It will always be interrupted. Even that scene when they are at the funeral, we see that this is actually just a video of the funeral that is edited by our protagonist on his computer. So, and I think that occurs a lot over the film, and I think that contributes to the fascination I found in that film, that it is very conscious of what it's doing.
Eliana, what was your experience with the film?
I was blown away by the first sequence. I hope it's really not giving too much away, but to
No,
me,
please
all right.
outline that.
I was heavily reminded of. Have you seen Masaccio paintings, or are you familiar with Chinese calligraphy scrolls to any degree?
Mm-hmm.
There's an element of that in them where, so first, the opening sequence, we see a football field. Football, I mean soccer. We see someone wiggling their hips on the field, two boys with their backs faced to us, and we see a mascot. And then the scene starts to scroll, and I started to think, okay, now we're following the mascot. And then the scene continues to scroll.
Oh, that's so nice
And then,
that you say scroll, you know?
Yes, to me, it didn't feel like panning, but
Right.
rather like tracking,
Unfolding.
scrolling, unfolding. And then we're looking at a night market where there's a bunch of plastic seats out for a restaurant, and we see three boys sitting at a table.
During the 2016 World Cup.
Right.
They talk for a while, and then it continues to scroll again, and we see the accident. But we hear it first off screen, and then we see one of the men get up. And this just reminded me of Masaccio or Chinese calligraphy painting, because sometimes you see in one painting, you see a figure repeatedly appearing in the same painting, and you go, huh, how is that possible? And it's just as if you're following a narrative of, oh, they're moving around. And that's why Jesus appears here, and then Jesus is by the water, and then Jesus is over here talking to a person. But in this way and Chinese scroll paintings also never ending, they're continuous. They can be added to. This was very just, it kept me on my feet because I did not know what to expect, and everything felt, and I was just blown away thinking, is this all staged, really? Or to what degree has this all been staged and thought out?
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing that impressed me the most is with this panning or unfolding is that every single thing, every time that that the camera panned to other things during a plane sequence, I was just like blown away by how carefully composed the next image was. Mm-hmm. And that speaks to the talent, not only of the director, but also about the talent of the cinematographer to be able to compose these images with such a keen sense of lighting. It was it was like watching at times a Pedro Costa film, because there were yellows, there were oranges, there was really, really good framing, like distance a bit, but not so distance like the Glazer film. And it evoked like the shadows in faces, and it led you, and I think this is very important. This film was really special in this way, because the type of films that he's referencing, or the sort of influences that he has and he wants to put on display, are films that take their time to do things. And as you were saying, there's this component of mourning and this sort of journey that this person goes, but at the same time, it's letting you have so much time to breathe in what is happening, that opens up a space that I really like in order to think with the film and be with the film. Like I remember, and I don't know why, but after the credits fall, which is like very late, like 45 minutes into the film, like the opening title, sorry, there's a shot of clouds and greens and greens and trees and stuff, and the clouds are there, and there's classical music or music playing on top of it, like violins. And I was just so moved by having those things be there, and I think I cried a bit, because it was just so beautiful to have like those little moments count for a lot. Because debut films, the usual example that I have is the Joachim Trier film Reprise. He's the one that did The Worst Person in the World. I remember watching that and being like, okay, I get who, what kind of things this guy has watched, and I know what he's trying to do. And in this one, I was just like, okay, I get who this person is trying to, like, there's a lot of Bellatar, there's a lot of, like, different components, Chantal Ackerman, and a lot of, I'm sure, other filmmakers in there. But it was just lovely to see someone that understood what they were doing, and having had so much precision in in composing an image and respecting that image, and not just saying like, you know what, here's something beautiful like the funeral here, and let's just leave it there for 5 seconds. No, let's have it there for a good 30 seconds to 1 minute. Let's see how the light changes. Let's see how the faces change. Let's see how the people move around. And going back to the description of the first scene, this conversation that the people have while they're in the market and talking about death and about attitudes towards life, I was just like, this is not a trivial conversation at all, and it sort of sets, and it's good. It's the sort of advice that they give you in film school, like put all the themes of your movie or your film in the first scene, like so that it's legible to the audience, so that they know what they're in for. And he ends up developing those things throughout these 3 hours that just go by because it's so aesthetically beautiful. And yeah, I was very impressed. At times I was just like, okay, this is super ambitious, and he's trying a lot of things, especially towards the end. But generally, I was impressed. You were also super impressed, Patrick.
Yeah, and I think one reason why we find this opening scene so impressive is also that this opening scene, was his short film 4 years ago that was called Stay Awake, Be Ready, that also played at the Cannes here, but really just as the short. And so he had a lot of time to think about that scene and how to really have it as tight as possible. And I think all you said quite eloquently, I agree with that. I think it's very precise. And even here, we have this idea that you have something like the dialogue here that is sort of beautiful and is sort of meaningful, but then this is sort of undermined by the environment, of like a soccer setting and of the World Cup. People are drinking beer, are inhibited, and he always knows how to escape the pathos that seems to be lingering around the corner. He's very often capable of circumventing that, and I appreciated that. Eliana?
I genuinely felt a lot of magic and spirituality in this film. I wonder if it came across for either one of you as well, just both in the long durations of certain camera shots and things that I thought, how is it even possible that he was able to compose such an image or have a certain ending? For example, when the rooster, after maybe a 15-minute long shot, suddenly flies up to the window.
Okay, but maybe we should talk a bit more about that scene, because this is first introduced. We are there in the countryside, and his friend is telling the protagonist, who shares also the first name with the director, so we can sort of assume that there is some strong connection maybe between the protagonist and the director. But yeah, so he is in the countryside, and he is told that this one rooster is just there basically to attract other roosters. And then, this is, introduced early, and then a good maybe 30 minutes later or so, I don't recall correctly, but then we actually see that play out. We see how this rooster is there and making its sounds, and then there is a response, and then
Rooster Marco Polo,
right? And so this is an amazing scene, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as a disclaimer, not only for this thing, but in general, as a sort of follower of Robert Bresson, it's always really, really good when a director has a knack for directing animals. Not only composing images with them, which is all fine and good, but there wasn't not just a scene with the rooster, but there was also a scene with a bird, like this long sequence where he goes with a motorcycle and then gets to the house of I think it's sister-in-law's father. And they have this really long conversation, and then at the end, like that's masterful. Like that sort of thing, you have the feeling of like how was this planned actually?
That's what I was talking about originally, because when we go inside of the house and we go around the house, and it seems like there are no walls, even though there very clearly are walls, and maybe it's going a little bit too far. But it felt as if he were challenging us to believe, perhaps, which is one of the conversations that the three men have at first. Do you believe in God?
Yeah.
And challenging this sense of faith, and
then
through using the camera
and even this notion of magic that you mentioned, this is sort of undermined by the idea that he's the magician in the film, and he does a lot of tricks to impress his nephew and other people. So even there, where we clearly know, of course, there is no magic, he knows his tricks, but it plays out so beautifully.
Yeah, and this long thing has like formal gestures that are like put the film on a next level sort of thing, because not only is the sequence long and following a motorcycle, a person, two persons, and then at the end of this long conversation, like a bird pops into the window, and it's like, how did you do that? And it's like it's so interesting. But the formal gesture there is that the light sort of changes, and we just see shadows of the two people having a conversation. Those things speak very well for future films of the director, because it's like I mentioned, I mean, I think my quote unquote problems with the film usually come out in like the last hour, not because of not because of duration, but because at that point I felt like he was trying like many things and breaking a bit with the grammar, so to speak, of the early 2 hours. There's this karaoke scene. There's another scene in the motorcycle with the mist as well. A lot of these things are formally beautiful, but at one point I was like, okay, there's a bit of showing off involved, and okay, that took me back, but still, like all of these things taken individually, each scene is so meticulously planned that it leaves you with a sense of someone that has seen a lot of films, but is also interested in creating their own type of signature. And I think that's the most important thing about any debut film, that you're like excited for what they're gonna do next.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot to look forward to. You mentioned a few points of reference already, especially where it pertains to slow cinema. I think we have to say that word here once, even though it seems to be sort of controversial to some people to use that term because it's so vague. But I was really, and I think you cannot not think of Be Gone, for instance, here, right, with the motorbike, which was very much invoking Kylie Blues. We have a massage scene that reminded me of Chai Min Young. What else? I wanted to, of course, Apichatpong. Is a very obvious sort of precursor here as well, his work perhaps. But I do think that often I felt like, oh yeah, this is clearly inspired by this director, this is clearly inspired by this director, but I still felt that he found a different angle, he found a different frame, he found a different way of conveying this. And yeah, I think I will very much look forward to this director's work in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that slow cinema is a controversial term. Yeah, I mean, as defined by Nadim May, but there are also like other ones, like, I mean, looking at it right now, durational cinema by Michael Walsh. And I think Michael Walsh is a bit more academic than Nadim May. And its definition is basically, it's about through the creation of space, you evoke an elongation of time. And I think watching this film, it's exactly it describes exactly the sort of experience that you're having, because the images are not just random images. It's not like just putting a camera in front and good framing or like indifferent framing, but these images are meticulously planned to evoke a certain set of signifiers, which makes them much more interesting at some points than what gets called slow cinema. Not the directors that you mentioned, of course, which are auteurs and like masters in their own right, but this feels like not wouldn't say evolution, but it's good to see this because it's a good example of what watching those type of films can get you as a director. And it's not, the references are not only like in terms of the formal aspects, but also there's this one thing which I talked with both of you about, where they actually reference a movie in a film in the dialogue. It's from
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. And it was those certain touches that are very much cinephile touches that I'm like, okay, I get it. I get what you're doing. There was another one which you mentioned as well, when we watched, I think it's a funeral, or in any case, it's a video that the person is editing, that the main character is editing, and we see that in the video he's filming a couple of people, and someone pops in front of the camera and he has to like push him away in order for us not to see. And what he does with editing is put a transition so that you don't see what happened in between. And what the director is doing is basically telling us, see, this is what happens when you put a transition here. You miss the human components of the film. And
right,
and that those are like a bit of like a thesis statement and kind of exemplary for what the director is trying to do. He's trying to get you to see those moments and take them in.
Yeah, it's this weird paradox of showing something that was removed by showing the removal. And I'm really surprised how confident this all is. This really displays a lot of, a lot of self-esteem, a lot of confidence in one's own abilities. And
Was this one of the highlights for you as well, Eliana?
Definitely was. And just going off of just not only cinema references, but also just rich with art history references as well.
Absolutely. I think, also shout out to Locarno on the multiple festivals that he did some workshops in, because I think this is very much like a product of very specific festival circuits, festival media labs or whatever. It's a very accomplished debut film. Yeah.
Well, yes, I'm very much looking forward to the next that he will make. Oh, yes. I was wondering, do we have, at this point in the festival, we're at day 11, are we not? Tomorrow is the last day. Do you have any Palme d'Or?
Palme d'Or. I have some, I did write down some candidates for all the categories, but we don't have to talk about all the categories. I guess Palme d'Or. Now that I've seen La Quimera, I was like, maybe Youth from One Thing, or controversial. I know Club Zero. But I don't know. With these things, I'm so out of the loop with like betting. I've seen people in line betting on these things. I'm like, what is everyone doing? I've seen people from certain publications, which I will not name, talking about econometrics and like award odds, and that makes me feel like I'm 80 years old, because I'm like, I don't know, I just want to watch some films, Do you have a Palme d'Or winner already?
On the last episode, I speculated that it might be The Zone of Interest, just purely because I haven't seen as many in competition films as I would have liked to. And also for the distant yet possible relevant message that it's trying to push, if people view it as such. What about you, Patrick?
Yeah, I also think that's a solid guess. I think that is sort of in line with what I would guess Ruben Östlund might award. And because it is still formally daring to a lot of people, I think his approach. I would still, if I would still hope for About Dry Grasses. I still think that's a great film, but since that has won already, I think they might want to do something else here this year.
What has it won? No.
Yeah,
Ceylan has won already.
Ceylan, exactly.
Ceylan,
Yeah. So maybe rather Glazer, but tomorrow we will know more, I suppose.
It's true. It's true. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Giancarlo.
No problem. My pleasure.
And where can people find your work or just your social media presence?
On Letterboxd and don't follow me on Instagram. On Letterboxd, you can find me on In Constant Loop. You can find me writing. I just published the first 11 reviews for the films from LGBTQI plus and women films here at the festival at filmleuven.com. And I also have another website called nowen.de, but nothing's been published yet so far. So yeah, you can find me on all those things.
Great.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much again.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye.